We are well into the earnings season. Yesterday we had ASML that had the earnings report. The stock is down around 10% compared to the highs the two days before the earnings. Today we had Taiwan Semiconductor that actually had a really good earnings in my opinion, and they were very confident in terms of the demand out there. And TSM is kind of speaking about, strong demand going late into 2025, and only in 2026 that they could possibly see that their supply is catching up with the demand. That's important for companies like Nvidia, AMD, and all the others that are depending on TSMC and also ASML. But today I was thinking how to have a look at Nvidia a bit closely. You can see that the earnings date is on the 28th of August, so more than a month left. But for me, the most important thing about the numbers is to have a look at the outlook. So you can see that in the Q4 of last year, they had their outlook for Q1 of this year, and that was supposed to be 24 billion US dollar. And we can see that they came in at around 26 billion. So essentially, they beat their guidance by around 7 or 8 or almost 10%, which is really good. Now, for this upcoming quarter, which will be reported on the 28th of August, they are expecting 28 billion US dollar in revenue. My suspicion is that they will most likely be able to exceed this at least, or at least meet that outlook. But I wouldn't put past them that they would exceed that number. And as long as they do that, I think the stock is gonna be in a safe spot for the moment. So long as the grander market does not have a big drawback. We have seen that over the past couple of days that a lot of the semiconductor stocks and like lost over essentially 10-15% in some cases. Like AMD lost around 15% since the tops just a few days ago. ARM, you could argue, is even worse. So yeah, it's been quite a bit of drawback. So it leaves a room for if the earnings are great, a lot of these stocks will kind of rebound a bit. But if the general market kind of turns a bit negative, then that's the only risk I see with Nvidia in the short term. If you follow me in the previous times, you know that in the longer term, I'm quite cautious with Nvidia. I'm speaking like in, let's say, a couple of years ahead of now. Not necessarily that I think the company doesn't have a great future, but I think there's some risk to it. But for the short term, I think you shouldn't be worried at all, unless there's as I said, a macroeconomic issue. So we can see that the guidance for this upcoming quarter is 28 billion. As I said, I think they will be able to exceed that number. And why do I say that? Well, it's quite interesting. You can see that DigiTimes Asia is talking about equipment makers see a demand boom for TSMC's CoWoS packaging. You see a lot of these kind of headlines for the suppliers to TSMC. You look at this kind of Twitter article here, and you can see that TSM CEO today, he said that last time he said that CoWoS capacity for this year should double, and they kind of managed to double that number. So probably he says that probably I will answer your question again next year and say more than double. So he's essentially saying that last time TSMC CEO told to the followers that they will essentially double their CoWoS capacity, and they actually exceeded that. He expects the same thing to happen this year. And he also mentions, as I mentioned before, that don't see the supply catching up with the demand before 2026. But again, it's very interesting because he kind of said the same thing 18 months ago. In mid of 2023, he said that he sees demand possibly catching up with the supply catching up with demand by 2024, late 2024. And now in that time space in late 2024, as we are entering into the second half, he's saying that he sees another year and a half before the supply catches up. So this is another good nugget for you, that if you are bullish on Nvidia and also the others, that there's definitely, it looks to be a lot of demand out there, because Nvidia are the biggest consumers of CoWoS capacity. So CoWoS is chip on wafer on substrate, so it's a special packaging step that you are needed for these large AI chips. And then we look at this again, you can see that this one this article is said that TSMC seeks land for a new CoWoS advanced packaging plant because they struggle to keep up with AI demand. This one again is a bit more, let's say, for the long-term point of view. Intel's next-gen Falcon Shore AI chips, which will manufacture on the TSMC 3 nanometer, used with their advanced packaging, gonna enter mass production already next year. how much market share will they be able to get from Nvidia? Difficult to say. The only thing we can say that at face value, it should at least offer some competition together with AMD. So it's not going to be easier for Nvidia next year. Doesn't mean to say, that it's going to be a bad time for Nvidia, but, at least they will have another company aiming for that kind of market. And that's going to be Intel. Now, I'm not taking any stance on how competitive this Falcon show is going to be. I will do a more technical in-depth analysis on that once we have a bit more, detail about the actual chip. But I think it's at least, pointing to the fact that the competition is at least increasing a bit. Then we can see that from another type of competition for Nvidia is OpenAI. They have spoken to Broadcom, and they are in discussions about developing their own AI chips. And I think this is because the main issue is that look at these margins that Nvidia has, 78.4% gross margin on the past quarter. So these are the money that the likes of OpenAI can save if they have their own chips. They are not necessarily happily paying Nvidia that kind of margin, where when they can essentially make those similar chips tailor-made for their own applications and save quite a bit of money. So there's competition coming in terms of more and more companies seeing the value in creating their own chips, their own essentially specialized chips for their workload, and save money. And then there's competition in terms of Intel and of course AMD. But again, as I said, this one was just for update for today, just to going into the Q2. And to be honest, again, I hold my hand up. I think I missed the train on Nvidia over the past year, but I think for the moment I wouldn't be too worried. And the numbers look good. You can see that the EPS for the last quarter was 0.61. So let's say 0.6. If you take that times 4, so the run rate for this upcoming year, that's $2.4 per share. So earnings of 2.4. The stock is around 121. So if we do a quick calculation and we take 121 divided by 2.4, which would be the supposed earnings, we should have a PE ratio of 50 for this year. But actually, it's kind of a bit conservative in my opinion, because I do expect Nvidia's, Q3 and Q4 to be much stronger than Q1 and Q2. So you could argue that, maybe we have a EPS of, let's say, 3.2. So if we take 121 again, 125 divided by, let's say, 3.2, that would give us a PE ratio of 37. And we're already in the second half of this year. So if you're investing for at least a year and a half from the future, if they manage to increase their growth of earnings, net income by, let's say, 50%, we're gonna see a decrease of the PE ratio to the mid-20s. So I think that's gonna be a really painting a picture of that this company is not at all overvalued at all in the short term. But again, for the long term, and when I say the long term, I'm talking about 2 or 3 years from now. That could be let's see how this kind of discussions evolve. Will open the likes of OpenAI and others go in the path of creating their own AI chips. Will we see Intel competing more, and will we definitely see AMD volume ramp? I've modeled quite a bit of increase in AMD's market share in the AI GPU space for 2024, at least for the second half of this year. So how will that affect 2 years from now? That's when so I think if I'm honest, looking at all the details, I think for the upcoming year you should be safe with Nvidia for let's say at least the coming 3 quarters. Going to let's say Q1 or Q2 next year, it's so difficult to have good visibility, but most of the stuff looks to be that the demand is real out there. So unless there's a total macroeconomic crash, I think 3 quarters from now, or if you stretch it 4 quarters, you should be safe with Nvidia. I don't think the valuation right now is insane. My negative point of view from Nvidia, as I always mentioned, is what happens when the margins decrease. We can see that they already kind of maybe locally at least peaked in their margins. They have 78.9% in margins, but they mentioned already in the previous quarter that beyond Q1, for the remainder of the year, expect gross margin to return to the mid-70s. And the guidance for, if you look at the guidance for Q2, they're guiding for 74.8 to 75.5. Even if they beat and let's say they get 76, they'll still be lower than, you know, the numbers that they got now, you know, at 78.4. So somehow, despite the revenue supposedly increasing, let's say, you know, for Q2, I would say like 28, 29, which definitely will be higher than the 26. Despite that, the gross margin will be lower. So, you know, and then this is without additional, you know, let's say enough pressure from Intel and maybe some minor pressure from AMD right now. So I think, you know, that's the long-term worry. But for the moment, I wouldn't be too worried at all, unless there's a major correction in the general market, which will essentially affect every other company as well. So now for the moment, I'm quite happy about Nvidia. I'm not at all, let's say, too negative about it. I think just be careful as you are with all the other stocks. And thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.